All right, and we're officially recording. All right, so topic of today is tech startups, the tech scene, and the tech business industry. Our guest is the CEO and founder of foundersuite.com. He's the host of How I Raised It podcast. He helps startups raise capital through software, content, and processes. Works with them on strategy, finance, venture, and exit issues. He's been described as the wingman to startup CEOs and as the biz dev CFO to go to. Right. Please welcome our guest Nathan Beckord. Is this? Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You got it. That's it.
That's it. Fantastic. How are you doing? Good.
Good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we're just coming off the long weekend. We had our 4th of July, Independence Day
Oh yeah, yeah,
celebration
absolutely.
yesterday, so it was
How was
fun.
that? I'm pretty sure the whole country was celebrating and all of that.
Super good. It's really fun. We had we've got kids, so we took them down and watched the parade. And the parade was actually really cool. I haven't seen this parade before, but they had like tanks, like World War II, tanks and like all kinds of crazy vintage cars and just other
Fantastic.
stuff. That's fun. So all good. All good.
Sounds interesting. Sounds interesting. So we're just gonna get into it. We've got a lot of topics to talk about here. So we're gonna learn more about you and how you became to do what you're doing. About Founder Suite, your podcast, all of that. We're gonna get into the do's and don'ts of raising money. I want to take your opinion about the hidden startup rules in the startup scene. How does one startup start a startup correctly? Some pieces you wrote about like 22 mistakes entrepreneurs make when pitching to investors, three experiments to find product market fit. We'll revise those content and maybe you can elaborate on that and many more. So let's get right into it. If you can tell us how did you end up doing what you're doing, and maybe explain to us through that journey how did you find foundersuite.com and what it is about.
Yeah, so I was helping companies raise capital as an investment banker many years ago, even during the dot-com boom and the first dot-com boom. That was kind of my first job out of college, and then really liked working with startups, kind of caught the startup bug pretty early, and um, went off and was consulting to startups for a while. So that's where the wingman to the CEO came from, where I was basically like a consultant to many startups, a couple hundred
Gotcha.
startups, and helping them raise money because that's what I knew how to do. And then had this idea of building some software for the process, right? Let's not just be a consultant charging an hourly or retainer fee. Let's actually make some software that can scale. That's the beauty of being a software business.
Hmm.
And so we launched this like 6 years ago, and have just been working on it ever since, adding more features, adding more tools, all with the intent of helping companies raise capital. So that's what it is.
Fantastic, fantastic. So you became as an advisor. So all of that in the what I would call the start of the startup scene. Obviously, technology startups started way before that, but when people starting like doing like angel rounds and VC rounds and all of that, you were advising companies there, and then you're saying you wanna kind of like platform make a platform out of that, and this is what foundersuite.com is.
Yeah, basically, if you think about how fundraising works for most startups, I mean, there's not just one path, of course. There are like crowdfunding paths and other paths, but for most startups, especially tech startups that are going out there to raise capital, it's kind of a right way and a wrong way to do it. You're usually starting with friends and family, getting some initial seed money to build out a proof of concept and using that to kind of get angels interested, using an angel round to build further proof points, more traction, using that to get venture firms interested. But at each step of that fundraising journey, there are right ways and wrong ways to do it. And so we're like, why don't we build tools that help people along this way be more efficient, do it faster, do it without screwing it up? Because most founders are first time founders, right? They haven't done this before. And something I like to say, it's like fundraising is not rocket science, it's not brain surgery. It's learnable by anyone, but there are right ways and wrong ways to do it, and it's easy to screw it up if you just kind of plow into it, head first without really sort of understanding how it works. So, yeah.
I see. And how does like Founder Suite function into that? Is it a platform where you can sign up to and you can find angel investors, or is it like a cross matching platform?
So it's not a marketplace. That's a question we get a lot. We're not, and I kind of put that in the crowdfunding world, right? If you really think about like a fundraising marketplace, that's what a crowdfunding platform is. And there are definitely some good good times to go that route. If you already have a large audience, maybe you have a large network of investors and people you can bring, crowdfunding might be a good place. But ours is different. It's really tools designed around how fundraising works in the sort of traditional sense of, let me give you an example, right? You're a
Yeah,
startup,
please.
you come onto the platform, and typically, your first step, you're dropped into the CRM, which is empty. This is
Mm-hmm.
what you would use to manage a pipeline. So the first step would be to start populating this with investor prospects.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have an Excel sheet of investors, you can bring that in, or you can start searching around in our database. And we have a database of about 200,000 investors, everything from angel investors, venture firms, family offices, fund of funds, LPs, even. Um, and so typically a startup would start some
Are these
searches,
international?
very international. I want to say there's like 10,000 or so in London, UK,
Mm-hmm.
uh, a few thousand in each European country at least. Um, Overall 200,000, I'd say about half of that is outside the US. So yeah, there's really good numbers out there. I mean, we've covered, I don't want to say we have every investor on the planet, but we have
The
a
major,
large
a lot,
majority
yeah.
of known investors covered. Um, so yeah, so that's what you would do as a founder. You would start like searching the database. If you're a advertising tech startup, you would
Mm-hmm.
search that, or virtual gaming, whatever. You maybe start to search in that. Identify investors that look good to you, like they invest in your stage, your sector, and then you add them to the CRM. So that becomes your list building, your prospecting tool. And then the other tools like the CRM is useful for managing all the activities that go on fundraise. The pitch deck tool is good to send out your pitch deck to investors, and then you can track and see who viewed your deck, how much time they spent. Or our email tool will be used for like follow-up emails, right? If you want to email 25 investors that you met with last week, you want to send them all a follow-up email. You can do that in one batch. And then some of the other tools like our investor update tool. So this would be used to really manage and nurture relationships, right? Sending investors a regular company update, really good way to build relationships with investors, keep them up to date on your progress. And really it's marketing 101, right? You're kind of marketing your startup to these investors. And then last but not least, as you start to get some traction on your fundraise, we have a virtual data room and a collection of downloadable like term sheets, cap tables, things like that. So as you start to get, some genuine interest in your fundraise, in your deal, you would start to send investors, confidential information like your intellectual property, your financials, customer references, all that. And you would do that through the data room. So you can really keep things like that confidential and secure and track and see who's doing what. So I've kind of covered a lot of steps in one, but if you think about it, it's sort of like from the starting point all the way up through, really closing your deal. There's tools for each step in the process.
Is it fair to say that instead of calling it like a CRM, like an IRM, like for investors, you know what I mean? Like it seems like it's literally an investor management system,
I
which
might
is
have to steal that and pay you a royalty. I like that. IRM.
IRM,
Well,
you know
it's
what I mean?
we call it a CRM, but of course, C means
It's
customer
for,
relationship
yeah,
manager,
exactly.
and these aren't customers so much, but the concept is similar. Yeah, so I like the
Exactly.
IRM.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Dividends immediately. That's good. I think you've painted a picture exactly what it is. Because to be honest with you, I thought, and I'm glad you corrected it, because I thought what you corrected. I thought that it was what a marketplace, but now that you're saying, now I get how is it different from a lot of websites that are coming recently? And I'm pretty sure you know most of them. And we've got a couple in the UK, there are a couple in Europe, couple, I think one even approached me from Australia, all of that stuff. A lot of them are great, some of them work. They didn't work for me personally. I'm talking about the marketing, the marketplace, investor marketplace platforms. But what you're talking about sounds actually very useful, because a lot of founders, what they find themselves doing is like DIYing this.
Sure,
Now, you know what I mean. Like for example, when I want to do this, I DIY this on my business management platform Monday.com, right? But when you're talking that there is a platform specific for this type of stuff, it understands the lingo of this, it understands the process, it understands the email updates, it understands all of that stuff. I think that's the unique proposition where founder suite can come and help. So how can is this price quote, or are there fixed prices, or how does the deal go?
yeah, it's super simple. And this is where it differs from a marketplace too. Like if you're going on a marketplace, let me go off on a quick tangent. One of the reasons that the marketplace model is challenging, and I'm not saying it can't work. One of the reasons it's challenging is that good investors don't really need more deal flow. They're already getting tons of deals pushed at them from their
Already.
network, from people they trust.
Mm.
And so it's actually hard to engage investors on a marketplace. And that's one of the reasons a lot of them have struggled and or failed. Startups love the idea. Like, let me put up a profile page and then have investors, discover me. Well, it doesn't really work like that. Because
Exactly, because the leverage is tilted towards investors, not towards founders, I'm afraid.
yeah. So that concept, it's a little bit different on the crowdfunding side. Crowdfunding side usually is like smaller investors, and a lot of times founders listing on a crowdfunding site have to bring their own audience. Like I say, like you kind of if you have an audience already, maybe you can bring those folks to drive them to your crowdfunding page. But this concept of a marketplace where you put up a profile page, investors discover you just out of the blue, it really has never worked, and I don't think it will work. So, having said all that, where were we going with this question?
So it's just the comparison of what you're doing
Yeah,
and how useful is what you're doing to how most founders find it a little bit unuseful. And I don't want to, by the way, I don't want to butcher any business model. I know like a couple of the companies I'm talking about, they're doing great. Some people are
yeah.
finding them useful. Some investors are finding them useful. But yeah, when it comes to what you said, and that, me personally, I find your product more useful.
Well, so the marketplace, business model is quite different too. So typically on a marketplace, and the models differ a little bit, but you're putting up a profile listing, hoping investors find you, and then if they do and invest, it's usually a percentage of the deal that the marketplace is charging, say 3 to 6% of the deal, right? Whereas ours is quite different. We're a simple SaaS business, software as a service. So we're charging $69 a month to use the platform, and that's
Hmm.
basically it. So we're not taking a piece of the deal. So it kind of depends on your economics and how you want to carve it up too.
Fantastic, fantastic. No, I think that's a fair price. So yeah, if people want to check it, just simply foundersuite.com, and that's it. You'll be there, right?
Yep, foundersuite.com.
Absolutely, and or they can reach out to you, obviously, on LinkedIn. I can see that you're very active, and we'll get into that. I want you to expand on some of the things you've said that I found interesting in a minute. But let's talk also about your podcast. So is this your podcast? Do you co-host on this? Do you host on this, called How I Raised It podcast? How does that go? Where can we find it?
Yeah, sure. So I think if you simply search How I Raised It on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and I think YouTube. We also take the videos and put them up on YouTube. You should be able to find it on YouTube by searching that. If you can't, just search on Founder Suite and you should find our YouTube channel. But basically, a couple years ago, I like to have our marketing team. One of the little rituals we do is every January, basically, start of the new year, I say, let's experiment with like one or two new marketing channels. Let's
Mm,
go off our comfort zone and like try something different, right? It could be event marketing, it could be whatever. And one of the years, 3 years ago, I guess, said, let's try a podcast. Why not, right? And we started doing this podcast and just interviewing founders, basically founders who had raised capital. And I thought I knew everything about raising capital. I thought I was the world's expert on raising capital because I'd been doing it for, 10 plus 15 years, right? Started interviewing people, I'm like, okay, there's so much to learn here. I've learned so much from interviewing people and really getting into like the detailed tactics they used to raise capital. I've learned more on this podcast in like 2 years than I did from 15 years of raising capital with startups, right? There's
absolutely.
yeah, and it's amazing just how
Insight, how much insight you can get.
and we really get tactical, really specific, like this is what I did, XYZ. This is the script I used, reaching out cold on LinkedIn. Or, I had one guy on there that was doing working angel groups. He was in the East Coast of the US, and he went around and worked, kind of had a system for working all these different angel groups, right? Others that we've had on more recently, get into like minute by minute how to run a VC meeting, like really good tactics to how to run. You're lucky you get an hour with a VC. Here's how to like really optimize that
Maximize it.
meeting.
Yeah.
Yes, really tactical stuff. So if you're looking for that kind of content, check it
Do
out.
you find those when you're having these conversations with them? Do you find them that I think the answer is very obvious, but I want you to go deeper on it. Is do you find them when they're raising money, they kind of get away from the business itself, and if that's the case, what would like for example well, let's say single founders, or even if there are two co-founders but one of them is just coding, the other runs the entire business, and when that person is gone, the coder cannot run the business for him, so
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, elaborate on that.
that's a great question, and that's one of the hardest challenges I'd say that founders face, right? So to your first part of that question, yes, absolutely. You basically need to devote a couple months pretty much full time to fundraising. That's just how it is. You have
Who's
to
running the business then during those times?
well, so that leads to the next answer there. So how do you overcome that, right? You're already working 60 hours a week on your startup. I've seen a few different ways people have solved that. One is, even if your co-founder's a coder or whatever, like giving him or her some of your duties. Like, I need you to run customer support, whatever it is, right? Marketing or Google ads, whatever it is. Like, take these off my plate for a couple months so I can totally focus on that. That's one way I've seen people do that. Another, we've had a couple people on the show that actually have hired kind of temporary, like fractional COOs, chief operating officers. Like, in other
Oh
words,
wow, outsourcing.
someone that put in, yeah, like 30 hours a week just to take this stuff off my plate again, so I can really concentrate on. So
Mm.
that's maybe option B. Option C is you just suck it up and you work 100 hours a week instead of 60 hours a week.
100%. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's always an option, and obviously there are a lot of people that did it and it worked for them and all of that. But I'm gonna put one more challenge on top of that,
Mhm.
right? So I'm not sure how things are in the US, or how they were and all of that, and how people start companies there. Um, but for example, when I see in the UK, the story typically is the following. You've got a couple of college students or a single college, whoever it is, a guy in university. At that point, that guy has zero income, right? Has zero income. He's dedicating his time for masters or for uni, undergrad, whatever it is, or he's working like a full time job, and that's it. Like we're talking about somebody in their 20s, 19s,
Yeah.
all of that stuff, and then they start this idea. The first phase, if they code, they start coding it. If they don't code, then they obviously pitch it to co-founders. They find that co-founder, all of that stuff, which is one of the hardest stages at that point. But let's say they succeeded, they found a good guy. Now, guy number one, let's say let's call him the operator, and guy number two the coder, right? they're both on part-time jobs or full-time jobs because they do have salaries, they do have like rent, they have all of that stuff. So they are already putting 30 hours, sometimes 40 hours, sometimes 25 hours on something else. So you've got that time, and then you've got the time that they need to work on the startup, and then the time that they need to raise money. How do you think that dynamic should work, or what are your comments on what I just said? Because then I'm gonna follow up with something else just to make it a little bit more realistic as well.
Listen, no one, something I that drives me crazy is when I get founders coming to me saying, "Hey, this is hard. This is why should I have to work so hard to raise money?
Mm,
Why is it going to take all my time? And what about my work-life balance and blah, blah, blah." Like, I'm sorry, no one promised you that startups are going to be easy. Startups are way harder. One thing I love to say, startups are way harder than it appears when you're reading TechCrunch or, whatever. Like, it's
mhm,
way harder than anyone really understands until you get into it. If you actually knew how hard startups are to get something off the ground and make it sustainable and funded, you probably wouldn't do it because it's so much harder than it is. So, I mean, I'm not really answering the question directly, but like, just understand that like
it is what it is.
it is what it is. It
Mm.
takes, like, I had black hair when I started. Now I have gray hair in a
Oh
few
yeah,
short years.
trust me, I'm 28. Look at this. Well, this is because of noise sharks, by the way. But I will tell you, I will give you the follow up that was I promise you on.
Yeah,
So when it comes to those people that I spoke to, and the demographic I'm telling you about, and this happened to me as well, and all of that. Now talking about myself, I don't care how hard I'm gonna have to work, because people around me, everybody knows all of that stuff. I laser focus. I'm very competitive, very ambitious, all of that stuff. And this is coming from a guy that I've got my missus, and I've got a daughter, and I've got this house
sure.
and all of that stuff. Um, so I do multiple things and all of that. Now here's the kicker, that is, I find it a little bit unfair,
Okay.
is that you face investors that say, well, you should work full time on your job, on your startup. And this is, we're talking about the pre-seed stage, right? You still at concept stage. You haven't found product market fit. You haven't found revenue. You're still building up. You're talking to your first 10 users, whatever it is, all of that stuff. You want to expand. You're learning. You're iterating. You're following the lean startup, all of that other stuff. You talk to investors, and they're like, well, you need to work full time. Okay, well, Mr. Investor, I have a daughter, and I have this, and I've got stuff, and I've got, and my co-founder's the same thing. He's got all of that stuff going on, and I have to work at that stage. I have to work job X for 16 hours, for 20 hours, for 25. My family is already sticking with me, supporting me, because I have a dream. So they're kind of like
Yeah.
accepting a lower lifestyle, because okay, this guy has a dream, we want to support him, we want all of that. But I cannot not like go. You know what I mean? So I started advising people, and give me your reasoning about this. I started advising people like, okay, if you're in a situation like how my situation was, my advice is, don't start your startup right now. Save 6 or 12 months of saving, or whatever it is, and then start it. And then maybe you can quit your job, because you are gonna face investors that are not fair. They're gonna tell you, no, I need you to work full time on it right now. What's your comment about everything I said?
Yeah, I think, um, listen, there again, going back to startups are hard. There's no entitlement, no one's entitled to start a startup. You're lucky if you have the privilege to do a startup, and not everyone can do that. So how do you get to that point where you're lucky, right? One of the things we did, I'll give you a little example. I'll give you a couple examples from Founder Suite, right?
Hmm.
One is I had a consulting business. So in our early years, and this is like for the first 2 years of our existence, I would go off and work on an hourly retainer basis, generate some income, save that money up, and then I would send that money to our part-time contract developers in Poland to work on the product. And and they would work on it for a few weeks. We'd release a new version of it, and then I would go back to consulting and save up and then send them another wire, 2 months later to do the next draft. And it took a long time, right? It took a
Hmm.
long time to get a product going when you have to do that, when you've got to earn the consulting revenue, funnel that over into the product. I would also say I got lucky in who I picked as a wife because my wife had a good tutoring business. It's like a stable tutoring business that, isn't going to make anyone like fabulously wealthy, but it's good, stable cash
Hmm.
flow. And she was very supportive of me. And now, to be totally honest, hopefully she won't listen to this podcast, but like multiple times she's like, you've got to get Founder Suite off the
Up
ground
and
by
running, yeah, by
by
one, two,
up
three.
and running by August or
Yeah,
whatever,
and
right?
and
Or
wouldn't you feel guilty? Wouldn't you sit down by yourself and be like, you know what, I have a duty to this. Well, I don't know what you would feel about, but
we sure, but so August would come and, let's say August is 4 months from now. August would come and go and be like, "Honey, we're seeing some positive," it's kinda like
I
the
know,
spin you give to investors.
I know the
"We're seeing
script.
some positive things here. I gotta
Yeah.
this is my dream. I gotta keep going on this." And that happened at least, like, 3 or 4 times where probably for almost, like, 2 years where, she'd say, "Okay, you can work on it a little while longer, but then I want you to go get a job at Facebook," or whatever, right?
Mhm,
Something
mhm.
steady. And somehow she didn't divorce me or kill me during that time, and finally, the company kinda, crosses
Yeah.
that threshold. We're like, "Okay, this is real." But so I guess my advice there, option 1, do consulting, pay money. Option
Mm.
2, marry well or choose a good
Select a
partner.
but that is one of the most important things, select someone that supports you. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna give a shout out, like, to my missus, because she supported me a lot with this. Obviously, my family, my mother, my brother, all of that stuff, they support, especially that this is a guy that was supposed to finish dental school, and
Oh,
I
okay.
got rid of all of that because of what I'm doing. But yeah, but I'm just gonna go back to the part of the question that I want to address is the investors.
Sure.
What
Yeah.
would you say to investors? Because my logic is, if I'm in a position where I'm an investor and I find a person that is willing to work full time or part time or whatever it is on something to pay the bills, plus come back home, manage his manage all of that stuff, build the product, talk to customers, plus talk to the investor himself, right? I would be like, this is the guy I want. I don't understand the kind of mentality where it's the reverse. No, if you're not working on this full time, then I'm not going to invest in you. I just don't understand that.
Listen, investors have lots of choices. They have lots of deals coming at them. And so if there are 2 founders, let's say they're both in the, autonomous, driving space, autonomous mobility space, whatever, you know,
Hmm.
and there's kinda 2 of them, and they're equal, and I like the companies both, but one has this thing like, "Oh, they're coming to me like, 'I need this money so I can quit my job, blah, blah, blah.'" I'm like, "Well, whatever." The other guy's like, only focused on the business, "I've got
He's
this thing
using
off the
his
ground, we've got
savings or whatever.
momentum."
Yeah, yeah.
One's like, "You'd be lucky you'd be lucky to get into my deal. I've already got the momentum going." The other guy, and this is not exactly what you're saying, but the other guy's saying, "Oh, if I had some money, then I could get things going.
Mm,
Then I could quit my job and really concentrate on." There's just 2 different, like, responses and reactions from investors to that. Someone who needs money to get going and focus on this full time versus the other one who somehow figured it out. Maybe they're already wealthy, whatever. Maybe they have an inheritance. I mean, it doesn't almost matter. It's like, but they've
mm.
already got things going. Like that's the one you're going to bet on as an investor because they've kind of busted through walls. They've solved issues. Doing a startup is solving 1,000 impossible challenges. That's what
Mm.
being a founder
There,
is, right?
there is type of a reasoning, because when I think about stuff like this, I kind of like try to take the position of both. So when I try to take the position of the investor, what came to my mind is like, okay, imagine if you have X amount of money that you want to put in startups right now. Let's say 200,000 pounds you want to put this year into startups, 7 startups, whatever, seven, 5, 6, whatever, 3, it doesn't matter. And you got pitched by like 20 startups. My reasoning is that you're gonna select the startups with the least red flags.
Sure. Yeah.
right? And I
Least
think
friction.
this is why, my argument took place is that, okay, you've got the two people, the examples that you've mentioned. You've got one guy, uh, you know let's say he's saving money, or he had a previous business, or he previous exit, whatever. He doesn't need money, he doesn't need the money he doesn't need to work at another place, so he's work. And the other guy needs to work another place because this is his first, all of that stuff. I think it's just the brutality of the market that, which is fine. I mean, I'm a pro market guy, so if the market says so, then the market says so. You can't argue the market. um but I just wanted to open this discussion so that both sides can see that, okay, you've got this guy, working on all of that, and that the founder can understand that the investor's perspective is that you have a certain deal flow, you have a certain budget, you're gonna naturally select the 6 7 startups with least red flags. I'm not sure if you agree with my conclusion there.
Absolutely. Both. You're going to pick the startup that has the most momentum and buzz going with it, but also the one that has the least friction, red tape, the least hair on the deal, right? That's just the way it is. So, yes.
Fantastic. And this is going to take me actually to another topic that I want to talk to you about is I found, and I haven't listed all of them, I'm just a couple of them here, found that there are like kind of hidden startup rules that I kind of
Mm,
want to expose to founders who are starting out right now so that they know them beforehand, because if they know them beforehand, they can skip a lot of mistakes. And I was trying to squeeze my brain because through my journey I kind of like noticed them, but I never wrote them down. But so I was today trying to squeeze them. But for example, a lot of investors will tell you, if you are in a technology startup, you must have a CTO if you don't code. That's kind of like hidden rule number one. For example, you've got another hidden rule that if you don't know what product market fit is, churn, all of those terminologies that are in the tech world,
mhm.
that's kind of like a rule. You must know those. The working full time thing, for example, a lot of incubators and accelerators, they'll be like, oh, we're pre-seed, you don't have to have revenue, all of that stuff. But then when you apply to them, they will send you back a letter, be like, oh, well, come back to us when you have revenue. So that is so try to get revenue as much as possible, because everybody who tells you it's fine if you don't have revenue, they will ask you for revenue.
Mhm. Sure.
Proper founder agreements, and a lot of investors as well, and I found this as well in my case, that they don't like development agencies. They don't like you to hire someone or whatever it is to develop it, because obviously of the iteration process and all of that. So there are some hidden startup rules. Do you agree with what I said? Do you agree that there are hidden startup rules? And if you agree, do you have other stuff other rules than the ones I've said?
There are a lot of these rules, and I don't even know if they're like hidden rules as much as just, you know, kind of biases, and not necessarily biases in a bad way, but biases of investors. Like, so let's take a couple that you talked about. You must have a CTO. Well, again, if you're looking at two equally comparable startups and one has an in-house tech team and the other is outsourcing to an agency or something like that, who are you going to want to bank on? The one that's been able to recruit people to come on their dream. That's a good sign, right? Like the founder's been able to recruit some high caliber tech people. That's a positive, right?
Hmm.
Like because that's part of the CEO's job, is to recruit people, and they're going to be doing hundreds, thousands of recruiting, if this thing takes off. So that's a plus there.
And I
Also,
found
like you
that true
mentioned.
I had a co-founder. After I had my co-founder, and he's now the CTO. I found like more traction when it comes to investors.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like you mentioned also, you can typically go faster and do more product cycles, if the team is in-house versus using an outsource. Having said all that, when I first launched Founder Suite, I had this Polish development agency
Hmm.
that we still use today. I love them. They've been wonderful partners to us. I'll plug them. Their name is CodeQuest. Mention to Tomek that Nathan sent you. He'll
One
give
hundred
you
percent.
he'll give you the special love. But like we went out pitching, and I had to admit, like to investors, I did not have a CTO. I did not have a technical co-founder. And a lot of investors immediately told me no because I didn't have a technical co-founder. So yes, there's a kind of a hidden rule there, but there's also exceptions to the rule. Let's take one more. You got to know. You mentioned like got to know your churn, your cost of acquisition, stuff like that.
Terminology, the tech terminology, yeah.
Correct terminology.
Product market
This
fit.
this is just basic, like, yeah, product market fit. This is just basic knowledge that if you don't know like how to talk about your metrics and how to talk about your business, you're not sophisticated enough for me to
Mm,
give you money.
mm. No,
You know?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is my point, is that before you ask for money, try to find out what these hidden rules are and learn about these terminologies. And I'm gonna plug Y Combinator because they have on YouTube, they have lectures about all of this, and this is what helped me kind of like get up to speed with this. Because
Yep.
obviously, again, when you're doing your daily life and you have nothing to do with the startup scene, and then you get an idea, and then you ask a couple people, and these people will be like, yeah, I would like to have it. Let's say you have an idea in the sports world or in the music world, whatever, and you go ask these potential target customers, be like, yeah, actually that solves my problem. At that point, you don't know even what startup means, you don't know half of the terminology, so you're now started your journey to learn all about that. And I would love if there was like a 101 book or 101 thing that tells founder, okay, you're about to start this journey, there are a few rules you need to know. Instead of spending money for agencies or whatever it is, try to find a co-founder. Instead of doing one, two, three, try to learn about these three, four, five terminology. When you have a founder, try to have a proper founder agreement with vesting and all of that stuff. And these kind of like the hidden rules I'm talking about, that I think people, I wish if people know just when they start their journey. What's your comments on that?
That would be an interesting book. I would actually like, here's all the hidden stuff that is not obvious that you need to know, but there is a ton of content out there. I mean, if you could take it another way, like, if you Googled what do investors want to see in a pitch,
Mm,
there's a, and we've even published tons of stuff like that. I mean, there's a billion, Medium posts on that, like what invest, and you'll start to see, oh, here's the metrics you need for this type of business, stuff like that. So I think as you start kind of studying, how to start a startup, watching the Y Combinator videos, watching some funding hacks stuff, and some How I Raised It podcasts, of course, you'll start to kind of
of
pick up
course.
on, you pick it up, you know what I mean?
Mm,
It kind of like is that osmosis process. So you just got to get out there and start plugging away. And even I'll mention this too, even
yep.
when you actually start pitching investors, something I tell founders, don't pitch your top three first. Pitch them a little bit later. So you have 10, 15, 20 pitch meetings with kind of your lower tier
That you
investors.
practiced on.
You practice on, and you start to just even get better because you'll start to realize what they're asking you. And the first couple of meetings, they might ask you a bunch of metrics questions that you're like, I'm sorry, I don't even know what that
By the way,
means.
this goes with customers as well. If you have a B2B business and you have like
Mhm.
very like potential customers that, oh, I want to work with one, two, three, four, five, try to go to like number 20, 22, 23, 24, and
Right.
ask them first, hone your pitch, and then maybe go to one, two, three, four, five. I don't know if you agree with that as well.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. It equally applies. With investors, though, you don't get a second shot. I mean, I think with customers, maybe it's not quite as rigid. Investors, here's your shot, here's your 30 minutes, here's your 45 minutes to an hour, whatever, you know, for your pitch. You don't get to come back later and say, oh, I figured this out. So yeah, it's probably even more important with
Makes
investors.
sense. So
Mhm.
so so this actually is going to take us to one thing. I want to take your learn from you, and anybody who's watching this, take advantage of your expertise, is that what would you think is the do's and don'ts of fundraising? And maybe if you start with the don'ts, because I like to learn the don'ts more than the do's sometimes, because it kind of limits your mistakes. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, from the top of your head, whatever you can tell us.
Sure. So There are many don'ts. Let's start with a few. One thing I'll start off with is kind of segues to what we just talked about here is don't go out fundraising until you've really got your pitch really well refined. And something I say, make sure you've given your pitch 10 to 15 times to other founders, ideally other founders that have raised capital, so they can really hammer you on it, give you feedback, give your pitch to your attorney, your accountant, your business school professor, like whoever will listen that can give you good feedback, right? So common mistake is founders go out with a bad pitch that is not clear, that's got too much information, that doesn't have the proper metrics. And like I said just a few minutes ago, you don't get to come back a month later and try again. You don't get a second chance. So mistake number one, your pitch needs to be amazing before you even get out there talking to investors. And like we just said, start with some of your lower tier investors to even further refine it. I'd say another common mistake of don'ts is don't do the spray and pray where you're just trying to, like there are a lot of databases out there. We have 200,000 investors in our database, but there's probably for your business 200 investors that are like a perfect bullseye target for you, right? And so you've got to spend the time going through search results, finding the right people, the right
Mm,
people and firms. Actually, let me revise that. The right firms and the right persons at those firms, right? So even a larger like venture fund might have 10, 15 partners. You don't want to spray and pray all those people. You got to find the right person that does your type of specific enterprise software deals, right? Um, and if you really spend the time researching and finding the right folks and qualifying them, this goes back to kind of B2B sales, qualifying the investor, making sure they do your stage, your sector, your industry, your location, all that good stuff, then they're actually going to be eager to hear from you because there's a perfect,
makes
match, right?
sense.
But a lot of people skip that. They just want to mass email investors and hope that some respond, and that's really bad. Investors can automatically sense that when it's clearly a spray and pray and you have not targeted them. So don't do
Mm,
that. I'd say, kind of touches on something we talked about a little bit ago. Like if you, and I call it kind of part-timing it, like you're a busy founder, I get it. But if you're only putting in a few hours a week on your fundraise, it's going to be very hard to get
very
momentum
hard.
going, and your deal is going to get stale. It's going to take you 8 months, and investors can pick up on if a deal has momentum or if a deal is stale. And so if you can't put in the time and effort, your deal's not going to go too far because it really does take that full-time hustle.
Do you have anything also on comparison when, like for example, when you're fundraising? I think it's toxic to compare yourself with the LinkedIn news and a lot of the news that you read, and it can put you down. I don't know if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I like that question. And just to be mindful of time, I do have a hard stop at about 12 minutes from now.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
we'll wrap it up in like 10 minutes. I'll probably ask you one more question, then we can wrap it up.
But to your question about, reading LinkedIn, reading TechCrunch, what do you mean by toxic? I mean, there's a couple different things there that we could unpack. One
So,
is,
so when I talk to my founder friends and all of that stuff, it is very frustrating and kind of, and sometimes in very serious cases, depressing when you're doing a fundraise, right?
yeah.
And then you're scrolling through LinkedIn, and every couple of posts, this guy raised this, and this guy raised this, and this guy raised
Mhm.
that, and we raised this, and we've done that. We've got this guy, we've got 100 this, we've got, you know what I mean? And I've just
Yeah.
learned to kind of disconnect myself from that market, you know what I mean? And yeah, just elaborate on that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
get it totally. That's a good question because I think, just like I said earlier, that startups are way harder than it looks. Fundraising is way harder than it looks. And yes, there are some of these exceptions where it's quote unquote easy, but for 95% of the other startups out there, it was a real grind that took the founder, 6 months of full-time hustle and a lot of rejection. One of the things I like to mention, and this is both from our own fundraising, when I was raising capital, and I see it with a lot of our customers. When I raised capital, I pitched over 200 investors and ended up with one seed venture fund and 10 angel investors, right? So about 11 people and one fund come on our cap table out of pitching 200. If you do that math, that means I got rejected 95% of the time.
Right.
Literally 95% of my pitches ended up in
Reject.
a no or ghosted me or whatever, right?
Dead end.
And yeah, it didn't, and that is actually very typical, like a 95%, a 5% conversion rate, meaning a 95% rejection rate is
Rejection.
very typical. So, but even the headlines you see on TechCrunch or LinkedIn, and we've done this 230 times on our podcast. We have 230 interviews with founders. They also got rejected.
Around the
Yeah.
same percentage. Yeah.
Yeah. Now there are a few exceptions where it would be like a person who worked, he was number 5 at Facebook or something like
Or a
that. And
second
then,
founder, like a
yeah,
second time founder.
there are people who had some amazing career before fundraising that let them build out a huge network of investors that love those people already. And they had easy, quote unquote, easy fundraisers. But for most folks, for most normal folks, it's really hard. So don't worry about those headlines. Just, do your own fundraise and realize it's going to take talking to a couple hundred investors and getting a lot of rejection to find the ones that, believe in what you're doing.
100%. And just because we're conscious of time, and obviously you've got things going on after this, very very quickly, because this is very important to like traction is very important to fundraising, right? What would you say your tips on getting the first 100 users, and then how to expand on that to start getting bulks of users at the same time? And this is something that a lot of founders don't know how to do.
Yeah, it's hard. Even I was a fundraising guy. So I was a finance guy. So I knew how to build, or at least I thought I knew how to build a platform for raising capital. But then when it came time to get users, I'm like, okay, that's marketing and sales. I don't automatically know how to do this. I mean, so two answers to that. One is like different businesses, of course, are going to have different, approaches. If you're doing enterprise software, you probably need to build up a B2B sales team that's literally, calling on potential customers and nurturing those relationships. If you're more of a content business, I mean, or SaaS business that's on the lower end, there's a lot more stuff you can do. But I think really to answer the question is something I really recommend and something we did every quarter, every couple months or whatever, try out like 5 different things. And
Mhm.
and in our early years, we put on events. We were putting on events, inviting investors to speak on a panel and startup founders to come in the audience. So that was like very targeted marketing. They'd be coming to hear the investors speak, but of course they'd see Founder Suite branding and logo. We did, the normal stuff like running Facebook and Google ads. We still do small volumes of that today. Um, we did like direct outreach to accelerators. And, if you think about an accelerator, every 4 months, the accelerator brings in 20 new startups.
Mhm.
They're all trying to fundraise. That's a perfect target market for us. So I guess I would even take an earlier step, figure out where your target customers are, where do they kind of live and reside on
And
the
the
web.
chain of events that they do, and maybe capitalize on each part of that chain of
Yep.
event.
Where do they hang out? Where are the watering holes? Like you think about the African savannah, where are those watering holes that all the zebras and stuff are? And then figure out how to get in front of those places.
The
And then I would
habitat.
say the habitat and run 4 or 5 experiments, measure as best you can, and you'll start to find a few things that typically work. And of course, when you find something that works, that's when you double down and repeat it. We
100%.
started our podcast as an experiment and it was working, and it was like attracting folks who would find us because they're fundraising. Boom, we have software for that. So obviously we're still doing that 3 years later. So, run some experiments. It's a short version of that long
A lot
answer.
of experiments. I think a lot of experience is the whole startup journey, whether it's
Sure.
raising money, adding features, adding all of that stuff. Just learn, iterate, repeat, learn, iterate, repeat, and all of that. And
Exactly.
Nathan, thank you so much for coming today. It was a lot of value. And if anybody needs to follow Nathan, just Nathan Beckord on LinkedIn. Tons and tons of content. You've got always putting content so on raising money, always putting content about like startup, very nice slides going on. And obviously they can go to foundersuite.com, to check out the product and manage their investor relation. And soon you will find the term IRM
IRM? Yeah.
on the podcast on the site. But with that being said, thank you so much. And I'll love to have you soon in the future.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. This was
Absolutely.
super fun. And appreciate it. Have a good rest of your week.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.